From the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, consider this with Kathy Wyatt, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
It was through Rome Francis traveled one last time in his electric Pope-mobile, a procession of faith cheered by 150,000 people to his beloved Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore, where he was laid to rest.
Questa preghiera de voi su di me.
12 years ago, Pope Francis asked the world to pray for him. Today, the world asked him to pray for them.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 28th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, Conclave 2025. Joining us to talk more about it are UNO's Martina Saltamacchia, Director of Medieval and Renaissance Studies, and Curtis Hutt, Professor of Religious Studies. Deacon Omar Gutierrez is also here, President and co-founder of the Evangelium Institute. He can also be found at St. John Paul II Newman Center. Thank you all so much for being here and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You bet, you bet. I want to start with you. What does the word Pope mean?
Well, the word Pope comes from the Latin Papa, and Papa means father. This was the term that was used originally to designate all the bishops, but then by the 11th century, only the Bishop of Rome. And this to signal the particular role that the Bishop of Rome has, that is to be the father of the church, so the successor of St. Peter, the apostle that led the early Christians in Rome.
Okay, thank you. And in the history of the church, how many popes have there been?
Recognized pope, 266 as of today. And I said recognized because there is also a list of anti-popes that were elected at the same time, often, of popes in periods of political tumult, schism, and so on.
Okay. Who has become Pope?
Well, mostly Italians. Actually, the first non-Italian to be elected Pope after centuries was John Paul II in 1978, and he was also the last Italian to be elected Pope. But in earlier centuries, we also have people from Africa, Syria, Germany, France, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. Deacon Gutierrez, in the 21st century, 2 popes have been elected. We're going to put a photo up of those 2 popes, and as we're doing that, tell us about Pope Benedict.
Right. Well, a couple of significant things about him. He's successor to Pope St. John Paul II. He was his right-hand man for the 26 years that Pope John Paul II was Pope. And he didn't want to be. That was the main thing, is he really wasn't looking for it, and everyone was shocked when he came out on that balcony. The other significant thing, of course, is that after 7 years, he resigned the papacy. He was the first pope to do that in almost 600 years. And he did so, by all reports, and there's no reason not to believe them, he did so because he realized there were reforms that needed to happen, particularly within the Vatican Curia, the sort of the mechanism that runs the church, that he felt he wasn't strong enough physically, but also I think temperamentally. He was an academic. He really desired just to go pray and to teach and write. He felt somebody else was called to that. So he resigned in order for someone else to come in and reform, which kind of set the stage then for the conclave that elected Pope Francis.
Now let's talk about Pope Francis and the legacy that he will have within the Catholic Church.
Sure. It's difficult, right? It depends on who you ask. So I think for the average Catholic, Pope Francis is the pastor they always wanted, right? Mm-hmm. The pastor who had this deep heart for the people, who wanted the church to have this extrinsic movement out from behind walls and into the world to invite people into a deeper love of Christ, to experience His mercy, maybe to emphasize more than that than like rules and regulations. For those of us who work in the church and are involved with sort of the running of the church, it's a little bit more challenging. There are lots of stories to tell, but just two things. One, regarding the reform, right? Pope Benedict said that there should be some reform. Pope Francis did do a lot of reform within the Curia, but there was still this sense of too much power coming. So one of the main issues was to have power go away from Rome, which he accomplished in some ways, but in some other areas he very much took control, and control of liturgy and other things that were centered in Rome that really ruffled a lot of feathers from around the world. And the second thing I'll mention is the peripheries. Pope Francis loved to talk about peripheries, and the conclave we have right now reflects the peripheries. We have cardinals from lots of different places in the world that we've never had cardinals from. So he accomplished that, but some of the things that Pope Francis wanted to focus on were very sort of Eurocentric Western conversations that alienated Catholics in Muslim majority countries, in Africa, in certain parts of Latin America, in certain parts of Asia. And in part of my role, the Archdiocese of Omaha, I work with priests from all over the world, and they felt kind of ostracized a little bit, forgotten by some of that. So it's a mixed bag. Everybody agrees he was a sincere man who wanted reform, and there's some discussion as to whether or not he was successful as he should have been.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hutt, let's go outside the church. Talk about non-Catholic views in terms of Pope Francis.
I think I can say this about Roman Catholics as well, not just people who are not Roman Catholic or even not religious. Pope Francis, I think he really embodied an ideal of like intimate humility, the type of humility which leads to empathy and which leads to developing strong personal connections with people. And you spoke about that a moment ago. I can remember several examples of this, over the last 12 years. The one that really stands out in my mind was when he did the blessing for the world, for Rome and the world during COVID-19. And, St. Peter's Square was empty and it was raining. And he was, he asked, "Where is your faith?" And I remember that was very, very striking. I work in the Middle East, and I can tell you that, for example, October 7th with the hostages, he met with the hostages. And the hostage families and the hostages had really interesting things to say about him, about his warmth, his ability to connect to them. I can say as well that when Gaza was being bombarded, he would be calling Roman Catholic parishioners in Gaza at night, to check in on them. And for me, that was very remarkable. We just saw the Pope Mobile on the intro. He's sending the Pope Mobile to Gaza for the children of Gaza, for their aid. That was part of what he bequeathed upon his death. I would say he was certainly a spokesman for social justice, for the preferential option for the poor, for the marginalized, for refugees, for the incarcerated. He spoke with them as a fellow traveler on this planet. I wanted to just add, he really wasn't a great peacemaker in many ways. And he ended up fighting some very difficult battles. Sometimes he was on the side that people appreciated. Other times he was on the side that that people didn't like very much. And that's certainly the case with the Russia-Ukraine war, right? And I know that in his final homily, he was also calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. So,
wow, Dr. Sultan Makia, I want to say at this point, let's transition into process. Tell us how a pope is elected.
Yes, so a pope is elected in a secret meeting that is called the conclave by all the cardinals that are under the age of 18. And before that moment, though, that happens usually in the days after the death of a pope, is a precise period of 15 to 20 days. Before that, while they wait for all the cardinals to arrive from all over the world, the cardinals get together and have individual speeches in which they bring forward the points that are most at heart to them. Just this time, there were 70 cardinals that gave individual speeches. And then there are a couple of meditations on the most impelling problems that the church faces. After that, the conclave starts. And it starts with the mass in the morning. Then there is a oath of secrecy that the cardinals need to take about everything that happens inside the Sistine Chapel, where they are closed. And then they start the votations, and they write, they handwrite their votes on rectangular ballots, trying to differentiate their handwriting every time for secrecy. And then the ballots are counted, and two-thirds majority is needed to elect a pope.
Okay, thank you. Deacon Gutierrez, as she's talking, I can't help but think of our viewers out there who are thinking, I saw the movie Conclave. So when we think about the process, how true to that process was this film?
Right. Well, so the white body bag is not accurate. They don't do that. It's a little bit more dignified than that for the poor Holy Father, and they don't take a hammer to the ring. As far as I know, they mark it so it can't be used. But from my understanding, especially the process parts of it, the way the votes are cast, the way it's written, the prayer that's said, and the conversations going back and forth from the Sistine Chapel to the Casa Santa Marta, the conversations they have on the side and as groups, the tensions that exist. Certainly, I mean, there's no bombs usually that happen. Sorry if that's a spoiler alert, but there's no that. I will say that the one thing though about the film and that there's the scene of Tucci talking to Ralph Fiennes' character, and he says it's a war. He says it's a war. That's not the way the cardinals view this process or the church or anything like that. Yes, there are tensions. Yes, there are different approaches. But these are all people who have given their life over to God, and they've lived this life for many, many years at this point. And they take their responsibility there very seriously. So are they passionate and hopeful for their own sort of view of the church? Absolutely. But they see each other as brothers. They really do.
Okay. All right. Dr. Saltamacchia, how have these conclaves worked historically?
Well, that's interesting because the church is considered the most ancient elected monarchy, and was not always the case. In fact, for the first millennium, actually, the popes were elected in a process that was more democratic than not, by acclamation of the bishop and also lay faithful that were deciding about the group of selected bishops that were decided by the bishops. But this changed then in the 11th century when it was decided that only the cardinals could elect a pope. Now, the conclave as we know it today has an interesting story because it started in the 13th century. It's 1268. And there are 18 cardinals in Viterbo in Italy, and they are trying to decide who will be the next pope, but they can't decide. And there are a number of political interferences, and this was not unusual. Just to give you an example, Gregory V was elected in almost the year 1000 by his cousin that was the Holy Roman Emperor. So that's an example of politics interfering not a little. So for 3 years they go on and they can't decide. And this is problematic because during the conclave, the Vatican doesn't have a ruler. And so at that point, the people of Viterbo decided to close the cardinals in the room where they were with a key. So cum clave means literally with a key, and wall up the doors until they were done. And so they managed finally to select a pope that will become Gregory X, who was actually not a cardinal, not a bishop, not even a priest at the time. And so he will be the person that then, once elected pope, will write the rules for the conclave to avoid that something like what had happened in those 3 years could happen again.
Fascinating. Okay, well, after all that, I'm going to bring us back to present day. Thank you for that. That was very well said. We're going to go back to present day now. I want to remind our viewers, or let them know, we're recording this on May 6th, right? So this starts actually a day later than we're recording. But Deacon Gutierrez, I have to ask, at this point, who do you believe to be the top contenders for this?
Yeah, it's so you always have to sort of clear the throat and say nobody knows. It's always a surprise. From what we're hearing from reports, so right now, and for the last for a week or so, many cardinals have been in Rome. They've been having conversations. They've been getting to know each other. What we're hearing is, in fact, just this morning there was a report that the Cardinal had left Rome in a huff. He was annoyed because he felt that the College of Cardinals wasn't respecting Francis enough because his cabinet was being put forward. The names that are being mentioned, Mamberti, who is an interesting fellow from Corsica, I believe. He's being mentioned. He has a long history of diplomatic relations, peace work, and he's not ideological on any side. And because he has the experience in Rome, they say that he would be a great person to finish those reforms that really still need to happen. Two other names would be Erdo, the cardinal from Hungary, who is considered maybe more on the sort of conservative side, an academic, a very intelligent fellow. And then, probably someone like a Parolin, or there's a wonderful bishop from Marseille, Avenille, I believe his name is, who's just really beautiful Frenchman who has a great love for communion and community. He's a wonderful man. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I want to confirm for our viewers when this conclave will actually begin and what makes it different.
Well, what it makes it different is that will be the largest and the most diverse conclave of history with 133 cardinals.
Wow. And when you say most diverse, what's most important to know there?
The number of countries from which the cardinals are coming, which I believe it's 71.
Okay, all right. Dr. Hutt, I have another question for you. Given the state of the world, and this is a loaded question, what challenges will this new Pope encounter?
I think I'd like to go back to the reforms that you were talking about.
Yeah, let's back up for a minute.
Inside of the church. No, this reform project called synodality, which basically refers to people in the church, leaders in the church, listening to their parishioners and learning from them. It's almost like Francis tried to invert the pyramidal structure, like the hierarchy, and kind of twist it like that. As part of this initiative, we know that women have been elevated to positions that they've never had before. This is also the case with lay folks, and I want to say as well, this process is incomplete.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And I think that will be the big challenge within the church. Outside of the church, the political tides have really changed an incredible amount. I think even, in Argentina, where Pope Francis is the first pope from South America, from Argentina, and even, a political leader in Argentina that I will not mention referred to him as an imbecile, who was supporting social justice. Shocking. I think that, we see rhetoric all of the time now, and it's all around the world, which really dehumanizes folks, which dehumanizes, refugees, which dehumanizes prisoners. I'm interested to see who follows Pope Francis and how they'll deal, with this changing political tide. I think there's also religious tides have been shifting. I think this is also the case in the global South in particular. The rise of, I guess what I'd call neo-Pentecostal or neo-charismatic Christian movements is dramatic. It really is, and they've actually accumulated some political power as well in some countries. I think, Pope Francis was a really interesting choice to kind of turn that tide back. I don't quite know if he managed, but.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to segue in then. You're kind of nodding a little bit, listening to Dr. Hutt. Do you have anything to add in terms of the challenges piece?
Yes, well, the global situation, I think, really is at the forefront of a lot of the cardinals' minds from the point of view of evangelization. So oddly, weirdly, wonderfully, we've seen in the West, in the United States, in France and England, this upsurge in conversions to Catholicism. The funny thing about it is we're all saying inside the church, we don't know what's happening. All of a sudden, there's just many people converting. We think it's a response to the disillusionment that exists in this world, the yearning people have, especially after COVID, and especially with the emptiness of our culture and consumerist culture. So there's something happening, we think, in the West. And the question for the cardinals is, how do we respond to that while at the same time maintaining the church globally that Pope Francis so much emphasized, that this is a global church and we need to pay attention to that.
So change in leadership. What about a change in policy? And I did want to ask the two of you that question. Deacon, why don't you just continue your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, to your point, I think the church needs to continue with this emphasis of some of the word that's used as collegiality, right? This working with everybody to get to the truth of things so we can be better pastors within the church. That conversation, which was started by Pope Francis through synodality, which is continuing, that needs to continue, and I'm hopeful that doesn't change. But I do think a change in policy will be, one of the frustrations many of the cardinals have mentioned is maybe more stability or clarity of expression. So being careful about how we express the faith going forward so we don't cause confusion where it's not necessary.
Interesting. Okay, Dr. Hutt, you have about a minute or two?
Thanks. In terms of synodality and the reforms, I can't see them walking back some. I don't think that women's positions in, the administrative hierarchy of the church is going to change. I do think that the moves made towards remarried Roman Catholics, and also to LGBTQ Roman Catholics, I think it's more likely that maybe some of that's rolled back. I don't think it'll be rolled back, on the question of remarried Catholics or lay or women in leadership positions. Finally, I'm very concerned with interfaith dialogue. And I'm really hoping that we don't actually go back to, I think with Pope Benedict, there was really some confrontation with especially Muslim leaders in the Middle East. And that changed under Pope Francis. In fact, Pope Francis went to Iraq in an amazing trip, I think, where he met religious leaders, from around Iraq. And I hope that we're able that the Roman Catholic Church is able to continue along that path.
Okay, all right, thank you. In the meantime, all eyes are on the Sistine Chapel, and you can take that however. I know we talked a little bit about, did you want me to talk about what it looks like? And it is beautiful. But really, as we're talking process, you know, we have a beginning, there's the middle, and then
an
end. So talk to us about the end.
Well, the end, which happens usually within a week in modern times. Our eyes are not inside the Sistine Chapel because we can't look inside, but on the chimney that is installed, was installed last week on the top, because from there the smoke will come out. The smoke is the smoke from the burned ballots, and usually the burned ballots that don't have a 2/3 majority have a chemical added to it that makes it come out black, which means we have not decided yet. And instead, in the case of a white smoke, we know Habemus Papam, we have a pope.
Thank you. Talking about Conclave 2025 today with our guests. Folks wanting more information can go to this website, usccb.org. I want to thank our guests for joining us today, for sharing your time and expertise. As with so much else, time will tell. Yeah, and thanks to our students who are working so hard behind the scenes. And of course, to all of you for watching. As we close, a look back at scenes from UNO men's basketball, as seen through the lens of Morgan Gardner, a senior here at UNO. We will see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television in the School of Communication. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call the UNO School of Communication at 402-554-2600 during regular business hours, or send an email to consider.this@unomaha.edu.